I have to ask you, have you ever hit rock bottom so hard that you find yourself sitting in the dark, staring up at the sky, and just begging? It's not some calm, polite prayer. I'm talking about the kind that comes out of you raw. When you're sick, you're broke, you're scared for your kids, and you don't even know if anybody's listening anymore. That's exactly where Chris Bledsoe was on a cold January night back in 2007. He walked into the woods by the Cape Fear River, a desperate man. But what walked out was something else entirely. Because whatever happened to him out there, it didn't stay in the woods. It followed him home. It showed up in front of his wife, his kids, it tore through his church, and it split his community in half. You had some people that called it a miracle. Others said it was something far darker. And then, the kind of people that you would never expect, they started showing up. You had NASA scientists, CIA insiders, and even the Vatican. And none of them came to laugh at him. They came to study him. Because Chris, he says these lights, these orbs, they don't just appear, they respond. They tend to know your thoughts, and they answer you. And years later, on Easter morning, something even more powerful showed up. A presence, a message, and a warning. A warning that points directly to right now. Now look, I'm not here to tell you what to believe. I'm not here to call this angels, demons, or something else entirely. I'm here to tell you what happened, as close to the truth as we can get it. Because whether you think this is deceptive, divine, or something that we don't even have a name for yet, one thing is for certain. That night on the river, it didn't just change Chris Bledsoe, it actually rewrote him. And whatever reached out for him that night might still be trying to reach out right now. Welcome back, listeners and watchers, to another disturbing and thought provoking episode of Relative Perspective. As always, I'm your host, Stephen, and tonight we're diving into a story that's been sitting with me for a while. This is the story of Chris Bledsoe. He's a regular guy from North Carolina. He was a builder, a pilot, and a father who, like so many of us, hit a point in his life where everything just started falling apart. He was financially ruined, physically broken by a disease called Crohn's, and he was mentally hanging on by a thread. And one night in '07, he walked into the woods and prayed for help. What happened next? It didn't just answer that prayer, it rewrote Chris Bledsoe. Now, look, I know some of you have probably heard pieces of his story before, and I got others probably thinking, here we go, another UFO story. And then there's a whole other group of people who hear the words like orbs, missing time, and glowing beings and immediately think demonic. No questions asked. And look, I get it. When something challenges everything that you've been taught, you're known to push back. I understand. But tonight, I'm asking you to do one simple thing. Just listen. I don't want to push any hype. I have no agenda. I just want to tell his story as he experienced it. The fear, the healings, the strain that it put on his family, and the attention it drew from people and places that you wouldn't expect. Because I'm not here to tell you what this is. I'm here to lay it out piece by piece, and I want you to decide what it means for yourself. Because I want you to remember the truth, it depends on where you're standing. And that, my friends, is relative perspective. Now, before we get into the lights, before we talk about anything in the sky, I want you to understand who Chris Bledsoe was before 2007. Not the guy that people argue about online, just a man trying to hold his life together. Chris, he grew up in North Carolina, and early on, flying was his whole life. He studied, he became a commercial pilot. He even taught aviation weather at a college level. This was everything to this man. But when his kids started coming along, he made a decision that a lot of fathers would understand. He didn't want to spend his life in the air, missing birthdays and missing precious moments, only seeing his family a few days out of the month. So he walked away from flying and he stepped into the family business. He started working in home construction. At first, it worked. It worked great. They were building over 100 houses a year. Life was good. He was living in a huge house on a golf course. They had a huge pool in the backyard. Everything was looking great. From the outside, everything looked like it was exactly as it should be. He was stable, successful, and he was secure in everything that he had. But then 2001 hit. That's when the World Trade Centers were attacked. With Fort Bragg right in his backyard, that was a huge hit because a big part of his business it depended on military families. And almost overnight, the market it dried up. It got so bad that Chris was left sitting on 72 homes under construction with nearly $100,000 a month overhead going out and nothing else coming in. And he saw no way out. He fought to keep this alive for years. He did his best. He did everything he could to hold it together. But by 2005, everything was gone. We're talking about 18 to 20 million dollars wiped out just like that. All of his properties, all of his savings, his entire net worth, it was gone. They went from living in that big house to living in a really small mobile home. And hell, it got so bad that he was even applying for the free lunch program for his kids at school. And if you've ever been there, you know that kind of fall, it doesn't just hurt financially, it breaks something inside of you. And on top of all that, his health was collapsing too. Chris, he had been battling Crohn's disease since his mid 20s, and I know how bad that could be because my wife has Crohn's disease. But now, with all that stress that he had, it got a lot worse, and I'm talking way worse. In '04, he ended up in the hospital after being over medicated. He said that this certain doctor, he messed up everything. He gave him this certain type of medication without properly checking his vitals or his liver, and it sent him into toxic metal poisoning. It was so bad that he nearly died. And Chris says in that moment, he had a near death experience, something that he didn't fully understand at the time, but it was something that changed the way that he saw everything from that point on. He didn't go into detail publicly right away, but he made it clear that something happened to him in that hospital room that definitely stayed with him. And when he came out of it, he wasn't quite the same. But sadly, life didn't get better. By 2007, Chris Bledsoe, he was 46 years old, physically wrecked, financially ruined, and mentally in a very, very dark place. Understandably, depression, it had a huge grip on him. He was praying, he was crying out, and he was asking God things like, how am I supposed to take care of my family and how am I supposed to feed my kids? That's the man who walked into the woods by the Cape Fear River in January of 2007. He wasn't someone chasing UFOs, and he wasn't someone looking for any type of experience. He was just a desperate father looking for peace and maybe some type of answer. Now, some people hear all that and immediately say, of course, he saw something. Hell, he was sick, stressed, under pressure. Maybe he hallucinated, and that's definitely a fair take. Then you had others, especially in his church, they would later say that this had to be something darker, something demonic. But Chris tells it a lot simpler than that. All he did was he walked into the woods broken and praying for help, and something answered. So now we're at the river. Chris, he's out there with his 17-year-old son, Chris Jr., and a few coworkers. It's late afternoon and it's starting to get cold. So they get a fire going and everybody starts settling in. But Chris, he's not really there. You know that feeling when your body's present, but your mind is somewhere else entirely. That's where Chris is at right now. So he tells them that he's going to walk up the hill for a bit, clear his head, maybe look for some wildlife, things like that. Nothing unusual. At least that's what it looked like. But the truth is, he just needed to be alone. So he just started walking. And the way he describes this part, it matters. He's coming up out of the woods, he's moving uphill, and at first, all he can see is the sky just starting to break over the tree line. But then, right before he reaches the top, that's when he sees something strange. At first, he thinks it's just the sun cresting right over the top of those trees. But something looked off. He said that it looked way too red. Not orange, not yellow, but deep blood red. And he said it was moving. It was swirling, almost like fire with little flames flicking off of it. He takes another step, and then another, and that's when it hits him. That is not the sun, because now he sees two of them. Two massive glowing orbs hovering just over that tree line. Chris, he estimated that they were about 30 to 40 feet across, and they were about 300 yards away. And not only that, he said they were completely silent. And that's when the fear kicks in because Chris, he's not guessing. Remember, he is a pilot. He knows what belongs in the sky and what doesn't. And what he's looking at, it definitely doesn't. So he drops down behind the crest of the hill, trying to stay out of sight, peeking up, trying to watch them. He's completely locked in, but now he's starting to get really scared because he just remembered that his son is down there at the fire. And whatever this is, he doesn't understand it at all. So he makes the decision he's going to get up and run, get back to his son, and try to get everybody out of there. But the second that he stands up, something changes. That's when a third orb appears and it's right above his head. And in an instant, it shoots over and joins the other two. Chris said in that moment that he knew there was no question, it knew what he was thinking. It wasn't just physical, it was personal now, almost like he had just stepped onto something's radar. And that feeling, it shook him because now this wasn't just something in the sky anymore. This was something that was aware. And then everything goes blank. The next thing that he remembers, he's walking back down the hill towards the fire, almost like nothing happened. No sense of time passing, no transition. He was just back. But when he gets there, something is wrong. The guys, they're not fishing anymore. They're standing there, they're waiting for him, and they look worried. Because Chris, he hadn't been gone for just a few minutes like he thought. He had been gone for 4 hours. And it gets worse. Chris, he doesn't see his son and he starts asking where he is. And they tell him that Chris Jr., he went looking for him, but he never came back. And that is when panic hits. Chris, he takes off in the darkness, shouting his son's name as loud as he could, pushing through brush, his heart racing, until suddenly he almost steps on Chris Jr. He's on the ground, he's curled up, and he's crying his eyes out. That's when he jumps up, he grabs his dad as tight as he could, and he starts yelling, "Why did you leave me, Dad?" Now it took a while, but after Chris calms him down, Junior starts telling his own story. He tells his dad what he saw. He said that he saw two small beings about 3 to 4 foot tall. He said that they were glowing, but not like lights. He said they were more translucent, almost shadow like. But their eyes, they were bright and glowing red. One of them, it just stood there staring directly at him. It didn't move, it didn't blink. It was just looking at him. And during all this, he said that he couldn't move. He couldn't run. He couldn't scream. Hell, he was completely paralyzed. That's when he noticed the other small being. It was down on its knees. It was picking through stuff on the ground, almost like he was examining things. He said one was locked onto him and the other one was acting like he wasn't the focus at all. That alone is enough to shake anybody. But this whole ordeal, it wasn't over. They get back to the fire. Then Chris tells his side. Then Junior tells his. And before anyone there could even process what they heard, one of the other guys, one of the coworkers, he looked up and screamed and said, "Look what's up there." And above them, 8 or 9 bright lights appear. Now, these weren't planes and these weren't stars. They were bright and steady. Hell, he compared them to Venus that they were so bright. Not long after they noticed them, that's when these things they started moving. He said that they were separating and then they were coming back together. Then they started circling each other almost like it was coordinated. Then there were 3 of them that broke off from the formation and it drops down and they said it landed just across on the other side of the river. And that's when fear, it turns into action. There's no debate, there's no second guessing. They run. They jump in the truck and they leave everything that they had behind. All their gear, their coolers, hell, they left everything. And they take off. Hell, they were flying down that dirt road so fast, they almost lose control coming over that same hill that Chris was climbing earlier before he saw the orbs. And that's when they see it blocking the road. They all see the same 2 red orbs. But now, the third one, it's changed. It's no longer an orb. He said it was a solid object. He said it was white, smooth, and tic-tac shaped. He also said it was about 40 to 50 feet long, hovering just above the ground. And around it, lights are moving almost like crystals are orbiting it. That's when they slam on the brakes, and before they can even react, that's when this thing, it starts to shift. It changes direction, and then it comes straight at them. For some reason, Chris said that he opened the sunroof and he started watching this thing. It passed right over their truck. He later said that it was low enough that he could actually hit it with a slingshot. And then, just like that, it changes direction again and shoots off into the sky. This thing is gone. Okay, before we go any further, I want to explain something. Chris, he said that ever since he got back to the fire after he had his missing time moment, that he wasn't scared of what was going on, but everybody else in that truck, they were scared to death. He said they were screaming and hollering and fighting as to who was going to get to go home first. Well, they finally got all that figured out, and they were able to drop off all the coworkers. And Chris Jr., they finally get home at about 11:30. But all the crazy stuff, it doesn't end there. Junior, of course, he's still terrified. He's running around his house, he's locking all the doors, turning on all the lights. While Chris, he's inside trying to make sense of everything. He's turning on the TV, trying to find out if he can hear of what is going on, if this stuff is on the news. He thought maybe there was some kind of invasion. Then they hear it, a low humming sound that's moving directly over their house. Then they notice that it was going back towards the river. And outside, they hear their dogs going haywire. They're going crazy. And this wasn't normal barking. This was different. This was aggressive, almost like they were trying to alert. Chris said right away that he knew that something wasn't right. He wants to go check it out, but Junior, he's shaking and he's begging his dad, please don't go outside. But eventually, Chris convinces his son to come out with him. You see, they got this huge Chesapeake Bay retriever by the name of Rosie that Chris said would protect them. They walk outside, they head down towards the kennels, expecting the dogs to be facing a certain way. But all the dogs, they're facing towards the woods. And he said that they were losing their minds. Now, that's when Chris, he sent that big dog, Rosie, in after whatever was out there. And he and Junior, they moved towards this tree, trying to circle it and cut it off. But in all that chaos, Chris, he slips and falls. And when he gets up and turns around, he expects to see Chris, his son, but Junior, he's not there. Instead, standing just a few feet behind him is one of the beings that Chris Jr. saw earlier. He said it was about 3 foot tall, glowing softly like moonlight, and those same huge red glowing eyes staring right back at him. That's when Chris, he freezes. Then he pushes back up against that tree, certain that he's about to die. And in that moment, he said he dropped his hands and he said, I surrender, I mean no harm. And then this creature, it speaks, not out loud, not with its mouth, but directly into Chris's mind. He said it was clear, deep, and almost like thunder. The creature told Chris that you don't understand. We're not here to hurt you. We're here to help you. And just like that, Rosie, she bounces out of the woods, and then the creature, it disappears. Now, Chris, he gathered his thoughts. He walks back to his house trying to process what the hell just happened. But here's the part that changes everything about Chris's story. From that night forward, he never took another pill. He never had to take any more medicine for his Crohn's disease. The symptoms that had wrecked him for decades, they were gone. Later, he claimed that he was tested for the markers and they didn't find any. See, after everything that happened that night, it didn't just scare Chris Bledsoe, it changed him. So, after that night, you think that everything would get better for Chris. He's healed, he's had that unbelievable experience, and something answered him, right? But that's not what happened at all, not even close. Because the very next day, that's when reality hit. Chris and his son, they started telling the family what happened, and they were trying to make sense of it themselves, realizing how it sounded when they said it out loud. And another important thing, you have to understand the environment that they were in. Chris's wife's family, they were deeply, deeply rooted in the Pentecostal church. Now, they didn't just attend. His wife's family, they helped build that church in North Carolina. They actually brought that movement there. And Chris himself, he had been in church all his life as well. I believe he was Southern Baptist before he married his wife and became Pentecostal. So when this story it started spreading, it didn't get just curiosity. It got huge backlash, and I mean fast. People, they started saying things like, you're playing with the devil, you brought something in your home, and they said you're putting your children in danger. And what's really bad is it didn't stay behind closed doors. This spilled out into their everyday lives as well. The teachers, they started pulling the kids aside at school. A lot of their classmates, they began picking on them. They whispered behind their backs. They spread vicious rumors. And of course, the kids, they were repeating things that they heard from their parents at home. It got so bad at one point that his daughter, she would come home in tears almost every single day. And not only that, their friends disappeared, and families that they knew for years, they wouldn't even speak to them anymore. And it escalated even more. Someone had made the call, and social services got involved. Now, I want you to think about that for a second, because what he was saying that he experienced, Chris, he was seen as a threat to his entire family. It got so bad that he was even threatened to be removed from the home. Now, during all this crazy stuff that was going, things didn't stop. They kept going. He kept seeing weird stuff. And he said if anything, it actually increased. He saw those weird flashes of lights almost nightly. Not only that, he started seeing shadow figures as well. Now, at first, Chris, he was the only one seeing them, but that didn't last very long. So you've got a man, he's already being called crazy, and he was trying to explain things that no one else could see. And he was doing his best to try to convince his own family that something real was happening. He did all that he thought he could do. He started praying, begging that his family would see it too, so that they would believe him. And like I said before, eventually they did. The kids, they started seeing things first, and not long after that, his wife started seeing things too. But instead of bringing comfort, it seemed to make the fear worse because now it wasn't just Chris anymore. Now it was real to all of them. And during this whole time, Chris, he felt like he couldn't stop talking about it. It became almost like an obsession. He felt like he had to. It was almost like something was pulling him to tell everyone that he could about his experiences. And he told them no matter the consequences. And that's where things they started to break even more. The church that he and his family they attended for years, they basically gave him an ultimatum. They told him, "Stop talking about this or you and your family are out." So Chris felt like he was stuck between a rock and a hard place. And for 5 straight years from 2007 to 2012, that's what Chris and his family's life looked like. Isolation, ridicule, and pressure from everyone that they knew. And like I said before, during all of this, Chris said the activity, it never stopped. Night after night, the orbs, the presence, it seemed to always be there. And on the other side of that, his community and his church, they kept telling him the same thing. They said, "This is demonic, you're destroying your family, and you've got to stop." So now he's stuck in the middle of all that. He's physically healed, but he's watching everything around him fall apart because of something that he never asked for and something that he couldn't control. I want you to imagine being put in that situation, having something that life changing happen to you, and everyone around you is telling you that everything that's happened to you and everything you believe, it's totally wrong. Now, by Easter of 2012, he was done and he was completely broken. He walked outside that night, he looked up in the sky, and he said something that he thought he would never say. He said, "Thank you for healing me, but you ruined my life." He said, "You've ruined my children's lives, and I'm done with you. I quit." He said, "I'm never talking about this again." And for the first time in years, he meant it. He went to bed that night defeated, ready to bury the whole thing, just to save what was left of his family. But just a few hours later, around 3 a.m., someone or something woke him up from a dead sleep. Now, like I said before, Chris had gone to bed thinking that he was pretty much done with everything that he'd experienced. He wasn't angry anymore, but he felt defeated and empty. But around 3 a.m., something answered. Chris, he wakes up suddenly and he hears a voice. This wasn't some faint, distant voice. It was deep and powerful, almost like it filled the entire room. And it said just one word. It said, "Arise." Now, when he hears it, he immediately sits up in bed. Now, understand the room, it was completely dark, but Chris, he said that he could still see movement at the foot of his bed. He said it looked like shadows in like weird shapes. And before he can even process or fully process what was happening, he was already moving. He got out of bed and he began getting dressed almost like he was pulled or being guided to do so. And he felt like he was being pulled somewhere, but he didn't know where yet. He walks out of the house into the cold night air and he starts following them. He saw three shadowy figures moving across the yard, and they were headed towards that dog kennel that we talked about earlier. When they got there, one of them stopped, it turned around and faced Chris, and it handed him something very, very strange. Now, when Chris put it in his hand, he said it felt alive and prickly, almost like he was holding like a hedgehog or something. The only thing was that it didn't have a head or legs. It was just this weird living shape. And then Chris, he hears that voice. The figure, it said, "This is yours and you must keep it." And once they put it in his hands, Chris said he immediately dropped it. He said it almost felt like instinct. He said whatever it was, it didn't feel right to him. And after he dropped it, the voice, it came back firmer this time and said, "No, you must keep this." So Chris, he picks it up again, trying to hold on to the damn thing, not even sure what the heck he was holding. And then there was silence. He looks up, and those three figures, they disappeared right in front of his eyes. Now he's standing there all alone at those dog kennels, still holding on to this strange creature. So he opens one of the doors to the kennel, he sets the thing inside, and closes the door. And the second that that latch clicks, that's when everything changes. He said that a blast of wind, it hits him, and I mean, it hit hard. It was like something physical, it slammed right into the middle of his chest, and it knocked him back on the ground. And the crazy part, as he's falling back, he sees something. He said it was a huge, massive shape that looked like a bull, but he said it wasn't solid, it was more translucent looking, almost like it was made of light or energy. And inside this huge bull, he said that he could see stars, just like the night sky was contained into this thing. And that's when it charges straight through him, and then in an instant, it's gone. After a second, he rolls over, doing his best to catch his bearings and trying to understand what the heck he just saw. Now, when he's finally able to look up, that's when everything looks different. Because now, standing just a few feet away from him is a woman, and she's floating there, maybe 2 or 3 feet off the ground. He said that she was glowing with this bluish, soft light, and it was lighting up the ground all around her. He said that she didn't look distorted at all, she looked completely human. Heck, he even said that she was the most beautiful woman that he'd ever seen. Now, as you can imagine, this was the kind of presence that would stop you in your tracks. He said that she was barefoot, she was wearing a long white dress that shimmered in the moonlight, and she was just there, calm, still, and watching him with this pleased look on her face. That's when she finally leans toward him slightly and she starts to speak. It wasn't in his head this time, she was speaking directly to him. And this is what she said: "You know why I'm here. This is your burden, and you must bear it. You're going to tell this story, and if you do, I'm going to help you. And from this point forward, we will always allow you to record our presence and share everything that you have witnessed with others." Now, as you can imagine, Chris was doing his best to process everything that he was seeing. Now, he was still on the ground and he was still shaken. He finally gathers all the courage he could to ask her, "Who are you?" And her answer is where things take a huge turn. She tells him that she is the divine feminine, a manifestation of universal love, and that she existed before creation. Then she said that across different cultures, she's been known by many different names. Like in Egypt, she was known as Hathor. And she goes on telling him something else, something even heavier. She said that there are forces trying to bring about the end. And they were going to do this by following the script laid out in the book of Revelations. And she said there's a darkness out there trying to force that same outcome. But that's not the only path. She tells him that's why his story matters so much. Because if he doesn't tell it and he stays silent, she said blood will be on his hands. And then she gives him a sign, a marker of sorts. This was kind of like something to watch for. She tells him that when the star Regulus aligns with the gaze of the Sphinx just before dawn in the constellation Leo, that will mark a shift, almost like a change in human consciousness. This is a moment where new knowledge it becomes available, and she points to a time frame. And this is where it gets kind of freaky. She said that the first sign of this shift will begin when Iran and Israel start trading missiles. Now, does that seem kind of familiar? Because that's kind of what's going on right now. Now, I want you to remember this was back in 2012 when Chris said that he had this encounter. I'm not saying what Chris is saying was real, but it's just kind of weird that things are kind of falling into place. They're starting to happen like Chris said they would. Then, just like that, she's gone. And from that moment forward, Chris said that everything changed. The orbs, they didn't just appear anymore, they started responding, and he was able to start filming them. Not only that, the activity, it increased, and the healings, it continued. That night, it wasn't just another encounter, it seemed to be a turning point because whatever he experienced out there, it was no longer random, it was intentional. Okay, like I said before, after Easter of 2012, things didn't calm down, they escalated. Chris, he started filming the orbs more openly, and believe me, they showed up. Not once in a while, but constantly, almost like what I was telling you about in my previous video about the orbs that I've been filming in my backyard. I'll go ahead and put a link to that video in the description below. Please take a look at that. It's really weird. Now, these things, they showed up dozens at a time. They were hovering, moving, almost like they were responding, kind of like they were listening to what Chris was telling them to do. And the healings, they didn't stop either. And there was a bunch of different reports of strange things happening around his property, including a tree that would ignite in the back of their property from the inside. They said it wasn't from lightning. They couldn't figure out how this thing started. They said that it ignited from inside the trunk itself.
Yeah, this tree just spontaneously combusted in our backyard. Burn up your iPad or whatever. This is so weird.
And believe it or not, they caught it on video multiple times. And there were even witnesses that claimed that they saw it as well. And not only that, there was a moment that made everyone around him stop and question everything that they believed. He said that they were inside and they were walking outside, and he noticed that his dog had a huge gash on its neck. He said that blood was spewing out everywhere. And I want you to remember, this happened right in front of multiple witnesses. They all claimed that Chris, he laid his dog down, he put his hand over that bloody wound, he started praying, and just like that, the wound closed and the blood, it stopped. The dog, it then stood up and trotted off almost like nothing had happened. Now, at this point, this isn't just a strange personal story anymore because people, they started hearing about everything that was going on, and not just random people either. Very, very serious people, people with credentials, people whose job it is to question everything. One of the first is a guy by the name of Dr. Hal Povenmire. This guy, he didn't show up to believe, he showed up to debunk. And he did his job. He went through every single piece of information that he could possibly find. FAA records, local reports, medical history, financial backgrounds. He talked to all the neighbors that would talk to him, and he checked timelines. He pulled at every single thread that he could. And after years of investigating, he couldn't explain it anymore. And not only that, he stuck around. He became close with the family. Hell, he was there for birthdays, graduations, and Chris's kids. They basically claimed that he was like a second dad to them. And before Hal passed in 2019, he told Chris something that stuck. He said that I've studied this my whole life, and now I know that it's about God. Then there's a guy by the name of Jim Simovin. This dude, he was a 25-year veteran in the CIA. And believe me, he wasn't just some desk analyst either. This is someone from the clandestine side of intelligence. And he didn't distance himself from the story, he leaned in. He became very, very close with Chris and his family as well. He even wrote the foreword to Chris's book called UFO of God. And he said openly that he believes everything that Chris is saying. And then there's a name that comes up again and again when we have this conversation about Chris Bledsoe, a guy by the name of Tim Taylor. Sometimes he's referred to as the Dragon. Now, this is where it gets kind of complicated because Taylor's background, it touches multiple agencies, which means that this dude is very well known in certain circles, if you know what I mean. He was involved with NASA, the Department of Defense, and the National Reconnaissance Office. Now, what's crazy is this is the kind of overlap that you don't normally see in one person. And according to Chris, Taylor, he took a direct interest into what was going on. He showed up with briefing material, he took Chris to NASA, and he gave him access that most people would only dream of. And here's what matters. He wasn't just curious about the sightings. he was actually focused on Chris's interactions with these sightings because the same type of objects, what some researchers call plasmoids, had reportedly been seen around military aircraft. Hell, they were even seen near space launches. He said that they were interfering, observing, and yet they didn't respond to instruments. But the important thing was that they responded to Chris, and that raised an even bigger question. They wanted to know why. Why would something ignore technology but react to this one human being? Now, at the same time, another group, they began paying attention. I'm not talking about one person, I'm actually talking about the Vatican. Because when they looked at Chris's description of the lady, they didn't see something new. They saw parallels to certain Marian apparitions, events kind of like Fatima. That's where people they reported glowing beings, lights in the sky, a lady with messages tied to the future of humanity, and also they talked about humanity's destruction. The only difference was it was in different languages, different context, but they definitely had similar patterns. So now you've got three very different worlds. You've got science, intelligence, and religion. They were all looking at the same man and asking the same question. They wanted to know what this was. And Chris believes the answer is simple. He said the orbs, they're not random. He said they're not just lights, they're responsive. They react to thought, emotion, and to intention, especially during moments of suffering and moments of prayer. He says that they're drawn to people who are open, not skeptical, not closed off, but like I said, open. Now, I want you to remember what the lady told Chris about that shift and the evil that's being brought upon the earth that's being orchestrated. There's one other thing that she said to Chris that I didn't mention. She said that the outcome, it's not set in stone. She said that there is actually another path, one centered around awareness, connection, and something that he describes as love. So now we're left with a choice. You can take a look at this story and say that this is a man who went through trauma. He went through loss and he built a belief system to cope with everything. Or you can take a look at it and ask, why are people with real credentials taking such a serious look at this stuff? And another thing, why does this story keep crossing the line between the physical, the spiritual, and something in between? Because whatever this is, it doesn't fit cleanly in one box. And maybe that's the point. So, after everything that you just heard, we're left with a story that doesn't fit comfortably into one lane. And to me, that's what makes this story hard to ignore. Because depending on where you're standing, this can look like a completely different reality. If you're coming at this from a skeptical point of view, there's a very clear argument. You say that you've got a man that went through extreme trauma, he lost everything financially, battled a serious disease, and he had this crazy near death experience. Not only one, he had two. And that alone can change how a person sees the world. Then you add in stress, isolation, and a religious background, and it's not hard to say that maybe all this was psychological. Maybe the mind, trying to cope, tried to create something that felt real. And when his family, they started experiencing things too, you can argue that fear and perception, it tends to spread, especially in a tight knit household that's under that much pressure. That's definitely one way to look at it. But then you've got the other perspectives. This one says, what if this wasn't psychological at all? What if Chris's experience is something real, but we don't have the framework to understand it yet? Because this isn't just one sighting, this is years of repeated events. You had multiple witnesses and consistent descriptions. And you had people with real credentials, you had scientists, the intelligence community, and some in the religious community who didn't walk away from this. They actually leaned into it. Now, I understand that doesn't prove anything, but it kind of complicates the he's just imagining this explanation. Then we have the religious perspective. And believe me, this one gets really intense because depending on your beliefs, this story, it raises some serious red flags. You have glowing beings, you have voices, and a feminine entity claiming that she was here before creation. There are people that will hear that and immediately say that this is deception. that there's something presenting itself as light, but it's not. They claim that this is something that might be pulling attention away from God and not towards Him. And to be fair, that viewpoint has been around for a very, very long time. But then you've got another side of that same conversation. You're going to have people who look at this and see parallels. Parallels like certain biblical encounters and certain visions. And not to the idea that everything spiritual fits in one little box. And that maybe what Chris experienced, it wasn't meant to replace faith, but expand how we understand it. And then there's the angle that might be the most uncomfortable of all, the one that sits somewhere in the middle. What if this isn't just pure spiritual, and it's not pure physical either? What if this is something that interacts with both? Something that can appear as lights, as beings, as symbols that we recognize depending on who's experiencing it. Because one of the strangest patterns in this story is that whatever this is, it seems to adapt. It speaks in ways that the person understands. It shows up in moments of vulnerability, and it seems to respond to human consciousness. And if all that is true, then the question it shifts. It's no longer is this real or not. The question becomes, what the hell is it? And maybe even more important, why is it showing up like it is now? Because Chris, he says that this is not random. Like I said before, he said that there is a set timeline, a shift, something that's tied to this year right now at the time of this recording, 2026. Now, whether you believe that or not, we are living in that time right now. We're living in a time where UFOs, they're no longer dismissed. And hell, you hear it on the news all over the place right now. You have government agencies that are claiming that these things are real. And then you have people all over the world experiencing the same thing. I never thought I'd be one of them. I never thought I'd be out there recording this stuff in my backyard. So even if you strip away all that stuff I just said, you know that something is definitely happening. And now the question is, are we interpreting what's going on correctly? Or are we trying to force it into a box that doesn't actually fit? Because at the end of the day, this story, it doesn't give you all the clean answers that you're looking for. It gives you tension, it creates more questions, and it puts you in a position where you have to decide. You have to decide what you think you're really looking at. Is this a man who broke under pressure? Or is this a genuine encounter with something that we just don't understand? Then you have to ask, is it spiritual, deceptive, or something completely different? I wish I knew. I don't know. But the one thing that I do know, stories like this, they don't just stick around for no reason. And the fact that it's still being talked about today, especially today, it's still being investigated and he's still having all these experiences. All of that should at least make you pause. Because whether you believe Chris Bledsoe or not, his story, it forces you to confront something that's bigger than him. The possibility that we don't fully understand the world that we're living in. And maybe we're not supposed to. Okay, guys, thanks for riding along with me on this one. I know this story sits in a really, really weird place. Now, depending on what you believe, it could be inspiring, unsettling, or maybe even dangerous. But that's what makes conversations like this worth having. Now, if you made it this far, I appreciate you being here with me. And if you've had experiences like this of your own, something that you can't explain, or anything paranormal, all you have to do is send it to me. I'd love to hear your story. All you have to do is email me at relativeperspective76@gmail.com. And who knows, maybe we will be able to put it on a future episode. And believe me, I do my best to read all of them, and some of them are definitely hard to forget. Now, if you've enjoyed this episode, I want you to make sure to pound down on the like button, hit the subscribe button if you're new, and if you're not new, what the heck are you waiting for? Go ahead and hit that, and hit the bell so you don't miss out on a weekly upload. And also, I'd like you to share this with someone who might sit there and listen to this story and say, what the heck is wrong with these people? And hey, if you go outside tonight and you decide to look up, just don't be surprised if something is looking back. Okay, guys, thanks again for watching. God bless you. We love you. And have a good night. Whew, that was deep. All right, let's go out there and look at some orbs again, Rosie. Love you. God bless you. Have a good night.